For our top international story this hour, we are going to take a deeper look at a case which has dominated mainstream news broadcasts for about 2 weeks now, the disappearance and alleged murder of Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi. On Thursday, President Trump said he believes Khashoggi was killed, telling the New York Times, quote, "Unless the miracle of all miracles happens, I would acknowledge that he's dead. That's based on everything, intelligence coming from every side." Trump went on to promise to levy, quote, "very severe consequences against Saudi Arabia if the kingdom is proven to be responsible for the killing." These comments came just hours after Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin announced he would not attend an upcoming business summit in Saudi Arabia, joining several corporate and media elites in boycotting the conference, once dubbed Davos in the desert. And while Khashoggi's case has caused politicians and the corporate media to actually start discussing Saudi human rights abuses and the kingdom's special relationship with the United States, topics we've covered here on RT America for years, the In Question team believes they've overlooked some important points. The key element missing from corporate coverage: how Saudi Arabia's exportation of Wahhabi ideology has served U.S. geostrategic interests. Wahhabism is the state religion of Saudi Arabia. It is a strict, ultraconservative interpretation of the Islamic faith popularized in the 18th century. In 1744, Wahhabism's namesake, Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, formed a pact with Prince Mohammed bin Saud to create the Emirate of Diriyah, what is today Saudi Arabia. Since then, rulers of the kingdom have worked to expand Wahhabism's reach, leading eventually to the emergence of the Salafi movement in the late 19th century. Salafism is based on a literalist interpretation of Islam and is the ideological lodestar of groups you'll recognize as some of the most infamous of our time, including al-Qaeda and the self-proclaimed Islamic State. For decades, Saudi has used wealth made off its vast oil reserves to fund the teaching of Salafi Islam everywhere from China to Chechnya, Pakistan, Indonesia, and beyond. However, things changed when Mohammed bin Salman became crown prince in 2017. Prince Salman was hailed as a reformer by mainstream Western press for cracking down on extremist clergy. The New York Times reports, quote, "Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is curbing their power as part of his drive to impose his control on the kingdom and press for a more open brand of Islam. If the changes take hold, they could mean a historic reordering of the Saudi state by diminishing the role of hardline clerics in shaping policy. That shift could reverberate abroad by moderating the exportation of the kingdom's uncompromising version of Islam, Wahhabism, which has been accused of fueling intolerance and terrorism." The mainstream media and politicians seem in agreement that Prince Salman himself is responsible for ordering Khashoggi's killing. Senator Lindsey Graham went so far as to call for the prince's ouster.
I've been their biggest defender on the floor of the United States Senate. This guy is a wrecking ball. He had this guy murdered. Saudi Arabia, if you're listening, there are a lot of good people you can choose, but MBS has tainted your country and tainted himself.
With Saudi Arabia in question, we are joined now by Hassan el-Tayyib, Policy Director for Chicago Area Peace Action. Thanks so much for joining us today, Hassan. How has Saudi worked to export Wahhabism, and how have U.S. interests benefited from its spreading? I mean, you actually have a family experience as a result.
Yeah, so my relative in Jordan was the Jordanian Air Force pilot that was his plane landed and he was captured by ISIS and burned alive in a cage, and that was put on YouTube and spread around. It was a horrible tragedy. I actually never met him myself. I grew up in the United States, but it was a direct link to the teachings of Wahhabism that have been exported by Saudi Arabia with their vast sums of petroleum money that they've earned over the years. So.
And in terms of how those that export of Wahhabism has allied with U.S. interests sometimes, in the case of, for example, Syria, we saw these extremist groups actually carrying out U.S. policy essentially in Syria.
So it's interesting. So if you look at U.S. interests to common everyday American citizens, I don't think that the exporting of Wahhabi Islam or the funding of al-Nusra or radical elements of on the ground in Syria help Americans whatsoever. But
right, 9/11.
Exactly. But our maybe the elite in our country, or imperialist voices in the administration and in Washington, have wanted to see the overthrow of Iran. So they've used these more radical elements to try to destabilize Syria, destabilize Assad, and try to bring regime change to Iran.
What do you think is missing from the corporate media's coverage of the Khashoggi case?
Yeah. So right now, people are outraged. It was a horrible tragedy. Jamal Khashoggi was, murdered in cold blood. Turkish intelligence seemed to think that it was, in fact, done by the Saudi royal family. So that outrage is definitely needed. Where has it been for the decades before, in every, crackdown on journalists inside the country of Saudi Arabia? Where was that outrage about the war in Yemen? Since 2015, Saudi Arabia has blockaded the ports of Yemen and cut off the flow of food, fuel, medicine, and clean water, leaving about 13 million people on the brink of famine and 1 million cases of cholera. So, I will take this outrage, certainly, but it needs to be sustained, and it needs to have some concrete consequences.
Yeah, do you see that happening? Do you believe that this moment will lead to a serious reevaluation of the U.S.-Saudi relationship?
I do. I think there's been a lot of movement in Congress right now. I'm right now working with the Congressional Progressive Caucus to lobby for HCON Res 138, the War Powers Resolution, to actually end U.S. involvement in Saudi Arabia's war on Yemen. As you know, the United States has been supporting this with mid-air refueling and targeting assistance, as well as arms sales. So, the kind of statements I'm hearing in the Senate and the House have both, made me believe that there is a big shift in what's, the mood inside Congress.
Thank you so much, Hassan el-Tayyib, for coming on and breaking all of that down.
Oh, thank you so much.